Okay. Yeah, we are live. So probably let's share my screen. While folks are joining, I'll just do the introductions. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for joining the BizKnight product series. As everybody knows, BizKnight product series is themed on product management, which is a 10-part a series on product management. And we are on the 6th episode today. So I think we have to congratulate ourselves, boost ourselves, because we have actually crossed half the way, and we are on the first step to for the rest of the half. So we are on the 6th episode today, where we have Raghav Radhakrishnan with us today, who's going to talk about product experimentation. So let's all welcome Raghav. Just to give a little briefing about participants' experience in BizKnight product series, so people could check the recordings and the upcoming events, upcoming talks, everything on the website that we have. And it's just, it would be just sufficient that you register only one time for the BizKnight product series, after which people will get the registration email, and then you'll start receiving the invitation email for every episode. You don't have to do registrations multiple times. After the event is over, people will receive a quiz email where people can just attend quiz, which is all relevant to the context of the previous episode. And then based on that, there's an opportunity for you to unlock different avatorians and keep guessing what would be the avatorians for this episode, because we really have a wonderful designer with us who's designing avatorians all by himself for every episode. They're all new avatorians for every episode. Having said that, we'll come to episode 6. Episode 6 of BizKnight product series is around product experimentation, where if you have questions around what is an experiment and why is it needed, what are different kinds of experiments, how to form a hypothesis, what are the pre, present, and post activities required in an experiment, or how to observe an experiment to gather findings and transform them into synthesized learnings, how to determine whether a hypothesis is proved or disproved. If you have all of these questions, much of these will be answered in Raghav's talk. If not, just post your questions and we will ensure that it is answered. So Raghav, to give a little introduction about Raghav Radhakrishnan is the head of product at Wiz, and has more than a decade of experience in product management by working with Matrimony, Link Logistics, Samsung, and now he is working with Wiz. So with that brief introduction, probably I will hand over to Raghav. Over to you.
Thanks, Diwakar. Thanks for the intro. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly talk about what I've learned in this. I'll just give a summary of what I'm going to talk. I'm just going to take you through 4 steps to run powerful product experiments, and then take you through the experiment landscape, talk about the key experiments that I have run, and I'll also talk about experiences that I've gathered from that, or learnings that I've gathered from that, a short synopsis of each of that. Yeah. So largely, if you look at it, running product experiments is a very important or a crucial aspect of building products. And largely optimizing the performance of a product is also largely dependent on experiments that you run. So if you ask me, there are 4 steps to run. One is actually you have to define a very clear objective and a hypothesis. You have to identify key metrics and segment your customers or segment your users so that you can run experiments on a specific set of users, and design and implement the experiment based on what you want to achieve, and analyze results and draw conclusions. So I would go back to my 6th or 7th grade, where you have a small form or a small template, right? When you run a science experiment, the experiment template will largely look like aim, things needed, method, and observation. So a very, very similar approach is what I take for running experiments. So if you say experiment, I just go back to my science lab where I used to run experiments. So that's a template I follow. So largely that is what I've done here as well. So the first thing to do is define a very clear objective. What is that you want to do? If you have that very clearly, you will know how to form an hypothesis. So what specific aspect of the product do you want to test or improve? That is very important. Clarity of thought is very important when you do that. You might, for example, you might want to increase user engagement, boost conversion rates, or reduce bounce rates. Once you have a clear objective, you can formulate a hypothesis. So what is a hypothesis? Hypothesis is actually a statement that predicts the expected outcome of an experiment. For instance, if you ask me to make up a hypothesis, it reads something like adding a prominent CTA or a call to action on the homepage that will increase the conversion rate by 10%. Maybe that could be an hypothesis that somebody has. So when you have an objective listed, the next step is to come up with an hypothesis, and then you identify key metrics. What is the key metrics that you will use to measure your experiment was a success or a failure? So that is very important. So this metric should directly align with your objective. Using the previous example, I would say maybe the right metric would be to measure the click-through rates, sign-ups, or purchases. So additionally, what somebody could do is segment the audience to gain better insights. So if you run an experiment, you might also want to know how this experiment acts or performs on different set of users. So for that, you will have to first study the user base that you have in your population, and then identify the segments there, and then identify the key metrics, and then run your experiment. If you don't do this, you will not know where to apply the results of your experiment. The result or the experiment might not work the same way for all users in your population. So that is very important. For example, if you look at my first instance, I go back to my matrimony use case because that's something that a lot of people could relate to. In the Indian context, if somebody is looking out for a partner, for a life partner, there are a lot of people who use a portal. One could be themselves. The other could be the relative. The other person could be the parent. So all three of them are using the same product. But if I run an experiment focused on one user, I cannot extrapolate and apply saying, okay, this will apply to a father or a mother who's looking for a life partner for his kid. That might not apply. So the application of an experiment should be based on whom you're targeting, and only then you will be able to achieve results. There's no point extrapolating one observation to an entire set of audience. So largely you plan the experiment carefully to ensure there's unbiased results. So that is a very key thing to do. If you should make sure that you run the experiment in a very smart way, because there are various types of experiments. If you have a control group and you have a test group, you should make sure there are no external factors that impact only a control group or a test group. That is very important. If you don't look at that, then the experiment in itself will not yield good results, or the results will be biased. So by default, when you run an experiment, it is essential to have a large sample size or a meaningful sample size to get any meaningful results. You cannot just have some 15 users coming to a site and you trying to run an experiment on them. That makes no sense. A small sample size might not also be an exact representative of your entire user base, and that could also lead to unreliable conclusions. So that is something that people should keep in mind as well. So you should also have enough data to draw actually any insight from an experiment. So the amount of users, the traffic, the user segmentation, all of that is very important. So that's primarily how you implement the experiment. So if you look at analyzing results and drawing conclusion, it's critical to let the experiment run until a certain period of time or a sufficient period of time to collect and analyze the data. You should also collect key metrics for both the control and experimental groups, which are not just your objectives or your success metrics that you defined. So those other metrics will allow you to understand whether there was any external influence in the set of people that you targeted. All you might know, there might be some other thing that is influencing the decision here. For example, your competitor running a similar ad that may drive a certain user behavior. So then you should not attribute that towards your experiment's success. So you should always use a statistical method to analyze whether your experiment was a success or a failure, rather than by just looking at a number and assuming that it worked. So you should always be very sure that there's a statistical significance, and it's not just a random chance. So if results align with your hypothesis and they show a significant improvement, then it means that your hypothesis was proven and you have an result that you can extrapolate or apply to the exact set of audience that you had chosen. If the results are not conclusive, then you will have to review your approach and maybe consider other iterations largely. So these are the 4 steps that I use to run any experiment. I will briefly touch upon the landscape of experimentation here. There is something called A/B testing, multivariate, a painted or a fake door. So these are largely the 3 types that I've used in my career. I will also talk about each of them briefly here.
Raghav, just one question. One participant has sent it to me. So I think the question is actually about, could you explain a little bit about the control group and experimental group? So maybe you could give an example on that.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll show that in my subsequent slides. I have a small example, real world example that I've done, and I'll talk about that as well. So especially in A/B testing, the control and the test group actually plays a very important factor here. So you have a bunch of variations that you would want to test. So then you run an A/B test. So you have a variation, you apply this variation to one set of users. You don't apply a set of variation to the other set of users. So that is called a control, and this is a test group. So it is largely used to take a data-driven decision and optimize products largely. So the group in which you're going to apply the variation is called the test group. The group in which you're not going to apply the variation is called the control group. So let's assume you have a prominent CTA, like I mentioned earlier, which has increased by, let's assume 30% of the usual size. So then you apply this variation only to a set of users. So then you call them the test group. The other set of users don't see this CTA, which is slightly bigger. So then they are your control group. So then you measure, was there an increase in conversion because of this? If there is an increased conversion because of only this, then you assume the result is a success. So the step 1 is to identify the feature or design element that has to be tested. Step 2 is you create multiple variations. In this case, 2 variations, one with, one and the other without. Then you randomly divide the users in your base into these 2 groups. So that is very important. For example, what we used to do is we used to sequentially number users and then take odd and even out for A/B tests. There are a lot of products that allow you to run A/B test effectively, like Google Optimize and all of that. You can very well use that as well. And you measure the performance of each of these variations and track the relevant metrics like your CTR, conversion rates, and all of that. And then you compare the results between these 2 sets and you verify which one worked. If the test group worked, then that means your experiment was a success. If not, it was not a success. So that's what an A/B test is. I will maybe give you an example of what we have done in one of our products. So I have a group A and a group B here. To set some context, this was at Link Logistics, where we were running an intra-city trucking business, where we had driver partners and customers booking trucks to move their cargo. So this was on the driver app. So the drivers, if they had to raise any tickets, there was a menu. In the menu, we had a bunch of options based on which they can raise a ticket. So we used to have focus group discussions with the drivers to understand what their problems were and all of that. There, one of the product managers observed that these drivers used WhatsApp voice a lot. They never used to type. They used to chat with each of them using each of the other drivers in groups using voice. So then we realized, okay, why don't we bring in a new voice feature in the ticket section instead of asking them to go click on each of that. So what used to happen, what the process was, when somebody selects a disposition here, one of our call center agents used to call them back and ask them, hey, what is the problem? What happened? How do I solve? So that was the standard SOP. Now, our objective was very clear. How do we go and reduce the time to resolution here and the call duration? Because we wanted to optimize the number of call center employees. We didn't want to overstaff there. So we had a very clear objective in mind. The objective was these two. And we also noticed a behavior, driver behavior. So we went and added a voice note. So group A, we didn't make any changes. Group B, we enabled a voice note. So the feature worked this way. After they recorded a voice note, it will come back to our agents. Our agents will listen to it, call them back. So what happened was very, very surprising. Earlier, that used to be a very nasty call. The driver used to go, vent his frustration there and tell what happened. And then it took him at least 1 minute to get to the actual issue. But this feature helped him vent the frustration as well cut down the call time. So largely, we saw the time to resolution reduced by close to 35%. And the call duration was much less, was close to 50% in this case. So that was something that worked out for us. So this is an example of an A/B testing. I hope this answered the person's question. So we went ahead with group B's and we applied this for the entire population. So that's what we did. I will also give you one more example of what we did. So this was at Biz. So at Biz, we are a cross-border logistics company. The entire cross-border logistics or the ocean freight space is largely traditional in nature. A lot of tasks are manual. We don't have latest APIs and all of that to interact with liners. So a lot of filings and a lot of cross-border complaints had to be manually done. So we have a small Kanban board kind of an approach that we have for all users. Every user has a task. They have to go complete that task. So what we observed was a lot of people from a particular team had a lot of tasks pending. So our hypothesis was maybe if we keep reminding them on a daily basis saying, hey, these are the pending tasks for you. Why don't you go complete? Maybe in a very, very intrusive way, like block him from doing anything else. Maybe the first time he logs in the day and show him this like a reminder, maybe then he will go ahead and complete the task. That was a hypothesis that we had. And so the objective, the metric that we had to measure here was on-time completion percentage that had to go up. So that was the plan. You should also define the hypothesis here, though it doesn't reflect the exact percentage, but the hypothesis ideally should also talk about what percentage you expected to go up by. So we again segregated the users into two groups. One, we didn't have an intrusive summary that we showed. The other team, the other set of people in the same team had this intrusive summary that came up that showed all the tasks that were pending. They had two actions here. One, they could either complete the task, say that, hey, complete the task, I'll complete the task shortly, or I'll escalate this to my manager. So this had a great impact, and the on-time completion increased by 12%. So largely, so this also worked in our favor, and we definitely applied this to the larger set of users. I've not showed a failed experiment here. I've showed both experiments that worked. So that way, yeah. I'll talk about a multivariate example next. What multivariate testing is, and then give an example about that as well. And any questions at this point about A/B testing?
Nothing on the chat.
Sure.
So I think we're good to look at it.
Sure. So multivariate testing is somewhat like an extension of the A/B testing. Instead of just having one variation, you have multiple variations here. You have to analyze the combined impact of multiple changes. Largely, this could be because of user behavior and the other metrics. So very, very similar to what you do for A/B testing, you identify the elements and features that have to be tested, create multiple variations of each element, which should result in a completely different combination, and randomly assign this to users, to a set of users. And then you measure and track. Again, here, you will still need to have a control group here. So there will be one control group. There will be multiple test groups here instead of having just one test group. So one key thing to here is it makes no sense to keep running this multivariate test or A/B test for very, very small items. Like, for example, it makes no sense to keep trying to change the color of a button when your traffic is very, very less. It makes more sense to do it at a very large scale. So that is what multivariate testing is. You have multiple tests and one control. I will give you an example of what we've done so that you can understand that better. So again, going back to the tasks that an executive have to do here at Biz, what we did is, what we wanted to move was to move the on-time completion of tasks. But here, the hypothesis was instead of having an intrusive thing, why not we send them an email? Maybe an email will help them remind them of the tasks that have to be done, and maybe some people will complete it. Maybe the other people might complete it if we say that, hey, I'm going to send this to your reporting manager if you don't complete it within an hour. The other hypothesis was, hey, what if I send it directly to the manager and copy all the executives there? So these three, we had different variations of largely very similar communication. What we wanted to communicate was, hey, these cards are pending. You have to complete one directly to the executive, saying, if you don't complete it within an hour, I'll go back, I'll send this to your manager, escalate this to your manager and ask this help types. Second, sending it to the manager, copying the executives. Third, sending it to the executive and each executive individually and marking his manager there. So these were the three groups, test groups, and one was the control group where we didn't send any email. So largely the one that worked was Group C, where we said we'll give you 1 hour's time, and then if you don't complete it, we'll maybe push this email to your manager as well. What we observed from an focus group later on, why Group A didn't work was because people didn't take it very seriously, largely because the entire team was marked in the same email, and they thought it was, okay, if that guy doesn't complete it, it's okay, I also didn't complete. So they didn't have that spirit of completing it completely. So Group C worked out much better for us. And Group C, like I said, Group C had the highest conversion, and Group D, which was the control group, which had no mails, was the worst one. Group A and B still performed better than the control group, but we extrapolated Group C to the entire set of audience and we applied that. So that's what that's an example of multivariate testing that we did here at Biz. So I'll move on to the third approach, or the third kind of testing that we had done, or we had experimented here at Biz, as well as previously at my earlier company, Link. So this is called a painted or a fake door experimentation, where you actually don't build the product at all. You don't build the feature at all. You just give an impression as if the feature is built. And if the user clicks on it, you ask him, prompt him saying, hey, can you give me feedback? I'm planning to build this product. Or collect some feedback, or understand how many people might go click on it. More like a study where you actually fool the user to show as if the feature is built and then collect feedback. So that is a painted or a fake door. So again, the format is largely very similar. Identify a new feature or product idea that you would want to test. Create a very simple landing page or user interface that actually simulates as if the feature is present. And then you add a very realistic content and visuals and call to actions and make it look as if it is real. And then you monitor how many people interact with it, and how many people actually show interest, maybe clicks, comments. Maybe after they click, you can show a pound saying, I'm trying to build this. Why don't you just leave your feedback or drop an email? Something like that, where you could go connect with them and understand. And then you go back and analyze the results to understand over a period of time, how many people have shown interest. Does it really make sense to go build this product or not? This kind of experiment gives you a heads up as to people really, because you might have got a lot of inputs from a focus group discussion or in a qualitative way. But if you really want to go and measure whether people will really use it in a quantitative way, this is a very good experiment to run. And I am a strong believer in not actually building products first and then figuring out that it didn't work. It makes more sense to go first, understand whether there's a need. And going back to the previous experiment, even the emails, we kind of made it like a fake door where we didn't actually build it. The team actually sent the emails manually from an automated email to resemble as if the email was system generated, and then we collected feedback. And that actually showed us improvement, and we actually built it. We put development effort on it. That way we could actually validate if there is a need, test it, and then go build it, instead of investing a lot of engineering effort and then realizing actually there's no need for the product or no need for the feature. I think everybody should be cognizant of before they build any feature. Right? The fail fast thing is I don't really believe in. You can fail fast in an experiment, not after you launch a product, after you've invested a good amount of engineering resources in. So very, very similar to what I narrated. We also tried it, Link, where we had an electronic proof of delivery. Like I said, Link is an mini truck aggregator app, very similar to your Uber and Ola, but just for mini trucks. That's what we used to do, mini trucks and bikes. A very compelling use case for us was to have a proof of delivery. By default, the system we also had electronic proof of delivery, but certain businesses wanted a manual or a physical proof of delivery. So a business and a bunch of customers after getting to a bunch of customer calls, we realized that customers really had the need. So then we realized the amount of development effort that it would take was very, very high. We had to build an infrastructure there to go do integrations with a bunch of either a courier company or somebody like that, and then show it on the driver app and all of that. So what we did is, to understand whether there's a need, we just created a small, so there's something called an add-on on the landing page. We created an add-on that said delivery challan. And when people clicked on it, we showed as if, hey, we noted that you have an interest in this product. We're building this, hold on, sit tight types. So that's something that we did to understand how many people really will go use it. And we had a tentative pricing in mind, and we showed that pricing. So after we did this, we figured out there's actually a very high need for this product, and close to 1/4 of all the trips that we did actually went ahead with this option. And we built an integration with one of the courier companies, and we were able to go deliver this a physical proof of delivery to their courier outlet, and they could go send it back to the customers. So this is something that we did, and we figured out there was a need. The other thing that we did maybe doesn't get classified as a fake door or a painted door or something we tried. This might not be a painted fake door. This is just another experiment very similar to a fake door. Our hypothesis was drivers who were offline might also be willing to come and take trips if it was favorable for them. On the one hand, we had a customer app where they could go check availability and book trips. We had a driver app where drivers could go online, take trips, go offline when they don't want. So what we did was we actually showed as if drivers were available, and we showed an ETA, a generic ETA, a made up ETA, and said, hey, drivers are available, you can go book. And then when we ran this experiment, when we got an order for such offline trips, we used to call that, we used to have a call center team which made calls to these drivers and asked them, hey, we have a trip, would you want to go online? You would get X rupees incentive if you go do this. So then we figured out that in spite of a driver being offline, but if a trip was favorable for him, he might still go ahead and take it. So that resulted in a way to generate revenue for us and for him. It was like a win-win for both of us. And the customer was serviced again. The overall number of trips that we did also went up. So we had, that was a great success. We received crazy number of trips. And though in the initial few days, we had to struggle to convince drivers to come online and take the trip, then we realized what took them to come online, and we kind of built it. So largely, we saw close to, I would say 30 to 31% conversion there in that range. When we showed these trips and the drivers were seeing that the drop location was nearby, and the trip fare was above a certain amount, and the trip duration was less than a certain amount, he wouldn't mind going and doing this trip for a quick buck. So the overall converted trips went up by 9 to 10% after we launched this feature. So this was a very big feature, which we didn't want to build first because it was a very engineering intensive feature. So we wanted to try this out, maybe using people first, and then build it if it actually was a success, instead of doing the other way. So this also worked out, and we actually made good amount of reps, and this was a very big feature that we rolled out at that quarter. So yeah, so these are the three kinds of experiments that I had done in my past stints, and these were the real-time or real-life experiments that worked out. Any questions at this point?
So there are two questions in the chat, Raghav. One is from Pavan Prasad. Pavan is asking, there can be multiple variations of experiments that can be defined and run. How do you prioritize the experiments to be run for validating the hypothesis? This is in relation to the multivariate experimentation.
Yeah. So if I understand your question right, you're saying there are a bunch of experiments you would want to run. You're asking how to prioritize that. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
So what I meant is, in multivariate example, there can be multiple. We can think of around 10, 11 experiments, but we don't have time to spend on all of them. So how do we go about prioritizing which ones will give us the best data, or best decision making will happen through these first 3 or 4 experiments?
Yeah. So largely, if you look at running experiments, I would classify the problem as to very similar to what you face in product management, right? How do you prioritize a feature, an effort versus an impact? I generally take the same approach, effort versus impact. Your objective or your hypothesis will really tell you what experiment to prioritize. If your objective or your hypothesis states that by doing this experiment, my overall conversion goes up by 10%, by doing experiment B, my conversion goes up by 15%. By doing C, my conversion goes up by 20%. And if your gut says all 3 experiments might work and data is there to get the experiment going, I would say take the one which actually gives you better conversion. That's what I would do. And you should also t-shirt size the effort that is going to be involved in building the product as well. So that's the other counterbalance that you should apply. Though this is going to give you a better conversion, but it might involve a huge effort from the engineering side or maybe overall. So then it makes more sense to go prioritize, weigh both of them, maybe put it in maybe a graph, and then figure out put it into quadrants maybe, and then select high reward, high effort, or high reward and low effort items first.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you, Raghav. And just one question additionally to Pavan's thing, but Pavan has asked about multiple variants, but even within the same variants, right? For example, if we go to the 3 emails which you were describing, right? And all of those 3 emails were having different elements, right? For example, the group C or something, it was telling that we will escalate it to your manager. But if you would be able to finish it within 1 hour, then we'll think of not doing so, something like that.
Correct.
Now, if let's say group C has worked, now how do we go about identifying whether it was actually the framing of the sentence which actually made the customer to enact a certain behavior, or was it the time period limit that we have given that has actually made the customer to take a certain behavior? How do we actually go about identifying that?
Yeah. So largely in that case, there were 2 elements involved, like you pointed out. So one is the time that we gave for the user to react. Second, the carrot and the stick, right? So there was a stick there that said that if you don't get back within an hour, this will be sent back to your manager types. So it's a combination of these 2. So what we did is we actually ran a few more variations in the same with a different copy. So for this, I had to condense it slightly. So this is an email that goes if the person doesn't complete the task on time. So this is already delayed. So you should actually experiment with the copy as well, if you ask me, because that has a resounding effect on how people understand the email, right? For example, that email had a combination of both. So it was a little moderate, which said that I'll give you time. If you don't complete it within the time, I'll go escalate. But there were other combinations or other variations that we tried, which said that I'm going to send this now. That was group A. Group B is we directly copied it and sent it to his manager saying it's getting completed. So every element that you would want to experiment, or every variable that you have, I would suggest you experiment it.
Okay.
in this case, like I said, it was somebody who was manually sending these emails as an experiment. We made it look as if we had a design team which actually generated this template on a daily basis. We sent it on a daily basis. We put in some manual effort to run this experiment, and then we actually productized this. So we ran a bunch of different copies to figure out which copy actually worked. And we had a team. Like I said, the sample size is very important. If you just have a 10-member team trying these variations, might not work, might not make sense. So we had a quite diverse team across different geographies. So we had a good amount of variations we tried out, and we figured out which combination of variables worked for us, and we picked that.
Okay. Got it, Raghav. And just one follow-up question to that. So let's say if, for example, the same example, the group C had worked. Now, I think for let's say the set of customers or the set of users who have actually reacted to the group C message, right? Maybe element one, for some set of users, element one would have actually made them to react. And for some set of users, element two would have made them reacted. So how do you go about finding that? Because quantitatively, it just says that group C worked. But if you would like to know more into the details of, why a certain thing has worked with which set of users, then do you go about interviewing or trying to ask that? How do you find that part?
Yeah. So largely, when you select the set of users whom you would want to run the experiment on, you go look at the demographics, you look at the kind of operations, the kind of work they do. For example, in our case, it was clearly the kind of job function or department they were working on. So so that is what we used to actually run this experiment. So we selected a set of users working in one group or one team, spread across different geographies to see which worked. So I would suggest you first understand your user segments and understand which variation worked for which segment, and then apply that variation only for that segment. You cannot extrapolate it for the entire population. For example, this worked for executives. This might not work for a manager. So for a manager, you might have to turn it differently. You might have to give him a different set of email, or an email might not work altogether because he might get a lot of emails. So there are a lot of variables here in play. So for example, the number of emails a person might get. Maybe this email goes much lower in his inbox. Maybe he gets 30 emails in a day. This email may not even be read. So all these variables actually play an important role. And the other factors that could influence this, maybe certain users who had a high number of emails coming in, then the read rate for these emails might have also dropped. So what you should do is you should actually study your user first, segment them, understand what are all the variables that would impact your experiment, and then run the experiment. So we initially ran we actually have a small group discussion, conduct user interviews before we run experiments to understand the user better. I would suggest doing the same.
Even those environmental factors and psychological factors of the user plays a huge role.
100%.
Okay. There's one more question from Harmeet.
Just to interrupt, sorry. On in terms of bandwidth, right, Raghav, now when you are building a product and everybody is kind of occupied with future, present, and past, how do you take out time to conduct such an extensive experiment, right? Because A and B testing, everybody would hear about it, but like you are going in detail in terms of understanding your customer, then coming up with different groups because of XYZ reasons. So how much time does one take out of their daily bandwidth to do this kind of an experiment? And then who do you see should be putting that time in? A few folks or anybody who is motivated, or generally what is the way to conduct these experiments in terms of planning?
Yeah. So the 101 of product management for me is you first have to understand your user thoroughly before you build any product for them.
Agreed.
You will have to go spend more time understanding or researching your user first, because without understanding what they do in an average day, how they're going to interact with your product, what are all the variables that might influence their decision or their usage of the product, you will not be able to build a product that will actually suit them. To give you an example, I'll just pull out a random example from my memory. During my matrimony days, we randomly figured out that in a few months or a few weeks, in a few months, we saw a huge drop in the number of page visits or overall visits. we figured out everywhere. We were just searching what happened. So then we realized IPL started. People started spending less amount of time on other stuff. So people were watching matches then. There's something that happened like from 4 or 5 years back. So you don't know what you're competing with. You don't know what mind space what other items actually is occupying the user's mind space. Maybe if you're building a B2C product, you'll have to understand when they're going to use your product. What other products do they use? What is their user behavior? And maybe what are the other products that have an influence in their decision making. So when you understand all of this, you will be able to arrive at a feature, maybe arrive at a product that will actually work, or you will be able to create experiments that will actually have an impact. When you ask me, how do you prioritize this? I would suggest before you build any product, you should first experiment. You should experiment. You have a hypothesis. A hypothesis where you use your gut. You come up with a hypothesis backed by data that says, okay, my hypothesis, I will move this number by X% for this user. If I think this could be a possible maybe a lever to push to increase this number. So that is where your gut plays. But for you to really build that, spend engineering effort to build it, I wouldn't suggest. I would ask you to go run an experiment, validate your gut, and then go build it. So I would suggest every product manager should do this. At least spend a considerable amount of time experimenting before you write your PRD for your product. And document these experimentation. There are a lot of experiments that have failed. In our case, we go ahead and document every experiment. We figure out what moved, what didn't move. Then you will literally be able to list down all the variables that actually have an influence in the user behavior. Once you have that, then you know what levers actually you can pull to move a number up. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, Raghav, thank you for that. Yeah, amazing.
Thank you, Raghav. And I think that's such a catchy point, that to experiment before we write the PRD. So seriously nice. Yeah. We'll move on to Harmit's question. Sorry, Sendil, you had a question. Go on, please.
Okay. Raghav, I wanted to kind of ask you a practical issue I faced and see if you had this issue, right? So you're running an A/B testing for one of the wellness product that I was building, a registration journey. And the user group, we are paying them to kind of do the testing for us. And what we found was they're always giving positive feedbacks of whatever testing we were given, because they were being paid. And if I asked them to kind of give maybe a real feedback, it started becoming extremely harsh, because they wanted to kind of justify the money they were paying. Just wanted to understand, have you faced these kind of issues and how have you solved this?
This is a very tricky spot to be. So I would first so then it makes no sense to go and ask the customer a direct feedback. It makes more sense to observe how they, for example, if it's I don't have a lot of context in what product that you're talking about.
I get it.
So what I would suggest is, instead of asking them directly what the questions are, I would rather go use tools to observe how they use the product. For example, something like an user, I'll go log or record the entire user session, play it back and understand how they use the product. For example, if your hypothesis is maybe this feature works great or this feature doesn't work great, you instead of asking them explicitly, you go play back an entire session, understand where they clicked, where they didn't click, how fast were they able to go complete an event or complete a milestone that you set for yourself. I think that is going to give you results rather than asking them explicitly this. Something like a clarity, which is free of cost, you could embed and see how the user plays around with your product. Instead of explicitly asking, maybe you just go, your hypothesis could be, how fast does he complete this journey? Maybe does this product actually work for him? Then you build the product in a way to see if he can actually meet these milestones. That's how I would do it.
Got it. Thanks, Raghav.
Yeah.
Thank you, Raghav. So you have a few more slides, right? There's one question from Harmeet.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, this question is, it's also other people have voted to this. Painted fake door question, painted fake door testing. So the question is, will this not disappoint customers, the painted fake door experimentation?
Yes, there is a possibility of you disappointing the customer, but that's where your wordplay comes into picture. You can go ahead and say that, hey, I'm building this product, or you give them a definitive timeline saying this product is coming in the next couple of weeks, or you say that we heard you types. So there is definitely a disappointment there, assuming that the feature will work, but then you prompt and say, no, I'm trying to build this product. But I think when there is a huge engineering cost involved or huge engineering effort involved, and when you are not very, very sure, when you can't run any other experiment, it makes more sense to go do this, even if you're going to disappoint the customer. Maybe what I would do is, after you show a fake door, if you know that the customer is disappointed, I suggest you should not run this to a very large set of audience and then disappoint everybody. You should know, you should be able to run this to a finite set of audience where you can extrapolate the results. And then I would maybe back it up with maybe an email or an thing saying, hey, thanks for your feedback. We've received your feedback. Make them feel involved or feel part of the journey of building this feature. Make them, after the feature is launched, you can go back and tell them, hey, with your feedback, we've built this types. So that way they will also be involved in the, they'll have a connect to the product, and they'll say, well, human behavior is to point out mistakes in Swiggy app, this happened, this some other app that happened. But when you say, oh, you reported there was a problem, or you reported there was a need, I went ahead and fixed it here, FYI. So then it is gratification, saying, okay, no, I was also involved, I complained and they fixed it. So that's, you will have to leverage on that mindset of the user to go do that. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Raghav. Hope that answers your question. Yeah, please. Yeah. I think
I just have a couple of slides more. This is largely the process that I follow while running experiments. And before I run experiments, or before the team run experiments, there should be a big brainstorming session. This should largely be cross-functional. You'll be surprised by the ideas that a lot of other teams might have, a sales team or an operations team, which is customer facing on a day-to-day basis, rather than us picking up the phone and talking to customers on an occasional basis. They will have a lot of ideas where they wouldn't know how to go execute it, but they could, or you observing the customers, or they observing the customers. So a big brainstorming session is a mandate. If you ask me, it should happen every week to come up with a list of ideas or a backlog of ideas. Then you should have an experiment prioritization framework, without which you will not know which experiment to run when. You should know how to prioritize your experiments. The one that I use is effort to reward. That's what I would recommend people. It's very, very clear and a very simple approach. And you should have a roadmap of experiments that you would want to conduct for every feature or every metric that you would want to improve. So these three are very important in planning and ideating for an experiment. The other important things are documenting how an experiment went. For that, it makes more sense to have a template, standard template, which has the objective, the hypothesis, method, results. Like I said, your ninth grade science lab template. That'll work brilliantly for this. It makes more sense to go record every science experiment that you did or your team did, store it or log it, and then you will literally be able to go figure out how many experiments worked, how many didn't work, why it didn't work. Have retrospective meetings, figure out why the experiment failed. Ask everybody involved their thoughts on why it failed. And also, you should also keep posting these as, hey, we did this experiment. This is what the result was, to a larger set of audience, to show them that you're building a product. Give them confidence, saying this is what this is more internal. I'm talking about more than external. You give them confidence, saying you're building products that are customer focused and based on customers' needs. You're building products rather than going by your own gut, going by somebody else's thought. That's largely, these are the three things that I would emphasize after you run an experiment. I'm pretty much done with my slides.
Thank you, Raghav. Thanks for that informative session. I think a few of our folks had to drop off for some client meetings, but they have actually sent some notes asking to thank you. So thank you for that. Sure. Thank you for this wonderful session. Are there any questions from the audience? Maybe if you would like to ask something, clarify something, you can just unmute and ask your questions to Raghav. Anything from people?
I have one question. So is there any way like we can run quick experiments in times when the team is running lean and there's no much of time, to run experiments? Any quick way of doing it?
Yeah, so it depends on the experiment, if you ask me. So if it is something that a product manager can whip up and do it, I would suggest go do that. Or an extended team like your design team, your product team. If a bunch of team could combine and run an experiment, that'll actually help give a sense of thought to the design team as well to run experiments. So I would suggest, for example, like I said, sending out emails, trying email variations, and all of that. There are a lot of ways in which you could do this. So one important thing is how do you equip yourself to run experiments? So that is very important. The frameworks or the way to equip yourself is very important. For example, email templates or small headers. While you build the product, I would suggest you build the framework or build integrations with third-party products that allow you to go change the content, change images, maybe change CTA sizes. Or when you build a product, maybe mention it in your PRD, asking them to go change the color of the CTA, maybe the size of the CTA. Give them a few options which could maybe enabled or disabled based on an environment variable or something like that. That will help you run experiments on the fly without depending largely on your engineering team. So that should be a very conscious effort that the product team puts in.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Just following Angela's question, Raghav, are there any tools that is of your suggestion that people could use for experimentation?
There are a lot of frameworks. For example, you can Google's optimizers like brilliantly there for A/B testing. I would suggest based on people's use cases, they can build their own custom framework. This is not need not be a very, very elaborate framework. Could be a way to identify even odd, maybe based on even odd user IDs that they have, and maybe placeholders for images, placeholders for important graphical places. Colors could be config variables. So these are all stuff that maybe a product manager could think about and write in his requirement document that he's giving to the engineering team before building a product, right? So then he can go experiment on those to see what works.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Anything else, people? Hoping all good. All right. So if everything is good, then let's take a minute of time to thank Raghav for actually coming here to give us this talk on his busy schedule. So thank you so much, Raghav. Thanks for this wonderful talk.
Thank you.
A lot of people have also asked to thank on their behalf. So it's on behalf of the whole community, we are thanking you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next episode. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Raghav. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Raghav.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Raghav.